Written by Frank Herbert and published in 1965, Dune is arguably the most influential science fiction novel of all time, rivaled only by Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. From its imaginative world that blends elements of both sci-fi and fantasy, to its timeless themes of fanaticism and the corrupting influence of power, Dune is to science fiction what The Lord of the Rings is to fantasy. A genre-defining piece of fiction whose influence can be seen in nearly every piece of media that followed in its footsteps. And, just like The Lord of the Rings, Dune was widely considered to be unadaptable to film. However, with the onslaught of successful sci-fi blockbusters in the 1980s, the task to adapt Dune for the big screen was undertaken by Universal Pictures and Dino De Laurentiis. David Lynch was hired to direct the film as he was a young up-and-comer in Hollywood, hot off the success of both Eraserhead and The Elephant Man. After reading the novel, Lynch agreed to direct the film and even turned down George Lucas in directing Return of the Jedi in order to adapt Dune to the big screen.
I was asked by George to come up to see him and talk to him about directing, which would be the third Star Wars. And I had next door to zero interest. And I came into an office and there was George. And he talked with me for a little bit and then he said, I want to show you something. Now, right about in this time, I started getting a little bit of a headache. So he took me upstairs and he showed me these things called Wookiees. And now this headache is getting stronger. And I could hardly wait to get to home. And even before I got home, I kind of crawled into a phone booth and phoned my agent. I said, there's no way, no way I can do this. He said, David, calm down. You don't have to do this. So someone else did direct that film, but I called my lawyer and told him that I wasn't going to do it, and he said, you just lost, I don't know how many millions of dollars.
After 6 rewrites of the original script, an arduous 6-month shoot in Mexico, and extensive reshoots and re-edits of the original cut, the film was finally complete. In 1984, the movie finally released, and Dune is one of those movies that is famous for all the wrong reasons. It was both a critical and box office failure, it angered both fans of the book and general audiences alike.
Dune, one of 5 science fiction films being released this holiday season, is the worst, according to me, by a wide margin. It's physically ugly. It contains at least a dozen gory, gross-out scenes. Some of its special effects are cheap, surprisingly cheap, because this film cost a reported $40 to $45 million, and its story is confusing beyond belief. In case I haven't made myself clear, I hated watching this film. I wish I could have left after 20 minutes. I couldn't. I had to stay there another 2 hours. Basically, I watched 2 things while watching Dune. I watched the movie, yes, and I watched my watch.
And not only was the film disowned by David Lynch, but his experience making the film killed his interest in ever making another big-budget studio film.
On Dune, I started selling out even in the script phase, knowing I didn't have Final Cut, and I sold out. So it was a slow dying the death and a terrible experience.
However, over the years, Dune has gained somewhat of a cult following and has been defended by giants in the science fiction community like Harlan Ellison.
This, I think, is one of the linchpins of Dune's importance, that it ever actually got made. It was a book that shouldn't have been shot. It was a script that couldn't have been written. It was a directorial job that was beyond anyone's doing. It was a production that would beggar the imagination and bankrupt 3 studios. It was a production that could not possibly be marketed in any way that anyone could understand or that they would go to. It didn't hit its audience. It looked like it insulted its audience. It looked like it defamed its originator, and yet the film was made.
But in the present day, after the success of the new Dune movies, and having read the book myself, I figured now would be the perfect time to go back to see if David Lynch's Dune is truly as bad as people say. And after watching the film, let's just say I have a lot of thoughts, so strap yourselves in. So the film opens, and whoa, hello? What's happening?
A beginning is a very delicate time. Know then that it is the year 10,191. The known universe is ruled by the Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV.
So yeah, this introduction really sets the tone for the rest of the movie. You know that whole show don't tell thing? Well, this movie completely ignores that rule and instead decides to have a giant floating head in space tell us everything we need to know about the plot. This monologue goes on for 2 minutes straight, and there aren't even any interesting visuals to go along with this monologue. Instead, we just get Princess Irulan fading in and out on the exact same shot. What? No, nothing's happened yet. Why are there fades? We also get this weird bit of dialogue.
Oh yes. I forgot to tell you.
What? How'd you forget? Aren't you supposed to be telling me the story? This feels like something that would be a Spaceballs joke, not a serious monologue to a quote-unquote serious film. Now, if you've read the book, you know that each chapter opens with a quote from Princess Irulan. And this is a perfect example of how some things just don't translate well from book to screen. Because the book uses these quotes as short little asides that either give relevant world-building information or something that is relevant to the themes of the story. In this way, the quotes don't disrupt the pacing of the novel. But in a movie, it's generally better to give this kind of information through visuals or dialogue between characters rather than through a giant disembodied head in space. This speech crams in so much information that could have been explained throughout the movie rather than it all being dumped at the beginning. I can imagine a general audience in 1984 watching this for the first time without having read the novel being horribly confused by this opening. And Princess Irulan doesn't narrate anything else in the movie, nor is she even an important character. The movie completely leaves out her betrothal to Paul and her political significance from the book, so her being the narrator doesn't make much sense for this version of the story. So right from the get-go, the movie at least lets you know what a mess you are in for. But once we get past that awkward introduction, we are immediately met with one of the best aspects of the movie, that being the score. The score for this movie was composed by Toto. Yes, that Toto. It is the only movie score that they ever composed and performed, but it is awesome. Some people complain that the score is too stuck in 80s synth rock, but I completely disagree. It really works, especially in the battle scenes and the sandworm riding scene. When that guitar and choir hit together, it is truly epic in the best sense of the word. Besides the music, the cinematography and direction is also really good. The shots of space and the landscapes of Arrakis do a good job of communicating the epic tone that the movie is going for. While it's never been confirmed as far as I'm aware, I feel pretty confident that Denis Villeneuve took inspiration from Lynch's cinematography, especially when it comes to this scene in particular. And if Villeneuve could find something worth paying homage to in his movie, then Lynch must have been doing something right with his direction. And oh look, it's David Lynch himself!
But sire, we can't leave all this spice!
But while the cinematography is great, the effects are horribly inconsistent. Despite having a pretty high budget for 1984, the effects work in this movie is all over the place. We go from some pretty good mini models and practical effects to some pretty awful green screen effects within just a few seconds of one another. It makes for a jarring experience, as you'll have some epic music playing over some awful looking effects. It also doesn't help that these effects are being used in some questionable ways. Now, make no mistake, Dune is a very weird book. It's a story about a space duke who huffs hallucinogens and rides a giant sandworm to become Emperor of the Universe. So, some weirdness is to be expected in an adaptation. But even with this in mind, David Lynch takes some liberties with the source material that are just bizarre. The voice, the psychic power used by the Bene Gesserit to control the simple-minded, is depicted like this. And this is just a bit too goofy for my taste. In this version, the voice can also be used to explode things and create projectiles, even though this is not in the book, and it doesn't really add anything to the world beyond just making the battle scenes even more silly. The shields, which are supposed to create only a slight visual distortion around the user, are depicted like this. This effect just makes every fight scene look incredibly awkward, and it's so hard to follow since you can't really see what either of the combatants are doing. The Atreides all have pugs for some reason, and we even see Gurney carrying one into battle, which is iconic, but for all the wrong reasons. Also, the fact that normal-looking Earth animals are living on Arrakis just looks odd. It doesn't really fit with the otherworldly tone of the novel. And again, Dune is a weird book with a lot of weird stuff in it, but it seemed like this is what Lynch really wanted to lean into with his adaptation. But, while the world building may be bizarre and out of line with the novel, the plot of the movie is surprisingly faithful. What's really strange about the movie is that, for all of its flaws, structurally, it is not a bad adaptation. Broadly speaking, the movie hits all of the major plot beats of the novel, from the destruction of House Atreides to Paul's duel with feyd-rautha. In interviews, you can tell that David Lynch really wanted to craft a film that was faithful to the source material.
When you sort of try to tune into the material, you sort of feel what this essence is. And in Dune, some things could fall away, and I still felt that it was still saying Dune. And other things had to stay, because if they went away, it wouldn't say Dune. It took a long time. It was a year and a half working on the script, and then many rewrites in the middle of shooting to make things more understandable. And I was always finding these little pieces of this puzzle. Suddenly I'd realize some part was, missing and have to fix something.
Unfortunately, as I referenced earlier, this film was the victim of extensive rewrites and re-edits. The original cut, as written by Lynch, was intended to be about 3 hours long, but Universal demanded the film be cut down to a measly 2 hours. And this fact is painfully obvious in the finished product. Some scenes feel excruciatingly long, while others have clearly been trimmed down to save on time. As you can imagine, this gives the movie a really awkward pacing. And while the plot is mostly intact, it is the character development that really takes a beating from the reduced runtime. In terms of the film's characters, they range in quality from decent to non-existent. One of the most common complaints about the Dune novel is that the characters are flat and uninteresting, but I completely disagree. The book version of Paul Atreides is one of my favorite protagonists in all of fiction. He is a figure in the vein of Napoleon Bonaparte or Julius Caesar. a child prodigy who is simultaneously a skilled warrior, a brilliant tactician, and a cunning politician. And yet, despite all his skills, he is a deeply flawed character, a man driven by revenge and willing to use anyone and any tactic to achieve his goals. He winds up being someone that you as the reader are simultaneously rooting for and yet fearful of what he is becoming. He is a very complex character with a lot of layers to him, ripe to be adapted for the big screen. But in the film, Paul is a pretty standard adventure movie protagonist in the vein of Luke Skywalker or Flash Gordon. He's just a guy who wants to do right by his family, which is a pretty shallow reading of who Paul is as a character. And Kyle MacLachlan is decent in the role, however, the script doesn't really give him anything to chew on. But speaking of chewing, in the book, the Harkonnens are a powerful antagonistic force that are simultaneously creepy and imposing. But in the movie, everything involving the Harkonnens is either really gross.
You are so beautiful, my Baron. Your skin, love to me.
Or really goofy.
Hell no! Hell no! That is I! Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, who encompasses his doom!
Kenneth McMillan really hams it up as the Baron, which is admittedly entertaining, but not in the way I think David Lynch intended. I could just show you scenes of the Baron out of context, and I think you'd get the point.
This person, this traitor, will be worth more to us than 10 legions of Sardaukar!
And who is this traitor?
I won't tell you.
Feyd. Lovely Feyd.
Wait for my brother.
Rabin doesn't really do anything except rip out a cow's tongue and eat it. Yes, this is a scene that happens. No, it isn't in the book. And no, I don't know why it's in the movie. And feyd-rautha, who is played by Sting for some reason, shows up to have this infamous scene. I think the less I say about this, the better. We also get this really odd scene with Thufir.
We brought you a little cat, Thufir. A poison has been introduced into your body, Thufir Hawaz. By milking this smooth little cat's body, you receive your antidote.
Yeah, that's strange.
And yes, again, no, this isn't in the book. And no, I don't know what gave David Lynch the idea for this scene. Once again, I think the less I know, the better. So while the Harkonnens are certainly gross, they don't feel threatening in the slightest, which is a pretty big problem in a story that's supposed to be about the natives rising up against a powerful imperialistic force. But, to be fair, the Fremen aren't treated much better than the Harkonnens in terms of development. The whole story revolving around Paul recruiting the Fremen to his cause is horribly underdeveloped. I speculate that this is the section of the film where the most footage was cut, because everything here feels incredibly rushed. We have Paul's sandworm ride, as well as Jessica drinking the water of life, but none of it is really given the emotional weight that it should be given. Plus, there is no mention of the Bene Gesserit's use of the false prophecy to manipulate the Fremen. Instead, the movie just takes the prophecy on face value, which completely misses the point of the original story. In the book, Chani plays an important role in Paul being received by the Fremen, but Chani just isn't a character in the movie. She doesn't get any real characterization, and Sean Young's performance adds nothing to the character. And calling the romance between her and Paul rushed would be an understatement.
Johnny, I love you.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
This happens right after the cat milking scene, by the way. Remember when I said this movie was a tonal mess? While Paul, Harkonnens, and the Fremen are all done dirty, there is one character that I think is done pretty well, and that is...
Poor Emperor. I'm afraid my brother won't be very pleased with you.
If there is anything people remember from David Lynch's Dune, it is usually the infamous Feyd scene and Aaliyah. Aaliyah is the one character from the book that I actually think is done pretty well in the movie. Being simultaneously cute and creepy, Aaliyah is one of my favorite characters from the book. And given that David Lynch always had an affinity for the creepy and supernatural, it is no wonder that he really gravitated towards this character. It also helps that Alicia Witt's performance is suitably unsettling, which is pretty impressive for a girl who turned 8 years old while making the movie. And, dare I say, Aaliyah is the one element of the Lynch movie that I actually prefer over the Villeneuve movies. I understand why Villeneuve excluded Aaliyah from his version, as it probably would have been difficult to fit with the tone of his film. But as someone who really liked Aaliyah in the book, to see her depicted on screen in all her creepy, precocious glory was just so much fun to see. But as a whole, the depiction of the characters in Dune is all over the place, which contributes to the film's tonal confusion and conflicted identity. And all of this confusion culminates in the film's climax, which is my favorite part of the movie, both for good and for ill. The climax of the film really encapsulates the movie's tonal problems as well as the problems with its pacing and character development. From a ratings standpoint, Dune sits in a very odd place. This was one of the first major studio releases to receive a PG-13 rating, a rating that was introduced after parents complained about Temple of Doom scarring their children for life. While a PG-13 sci-fi blockbuster has become the standard in the modern era, in 1984 it made Dune even more of an oddity. It falls into that dreaded category of being a movie that is simultaneously too goofy for adults, but too gross and violent for kids, which is perfectly exemplified in the climax. We get this hilariously bad effect of the Baron flying into the mouth of a sandworm, followed by this surprisingly gruesome shot of Feyd getting stabbed through the mouth. It's a movie that is really for nobody except for people like me, men in their late 20s with too much time on their hands who are interested in weird sci-fi movies from the 80s. Also, the climax just comes out of nowhere. We get a brief compilation of the Fremen rebelling against the Harkonnen, then all of a sudden, we're at the final battle. There was no satisfying build-up to the confrontation, because Aaliyah just shows up, says,
My brother is coming with many Fremen warriors.
And then they arrive. I think one of the main reasons Villeneuve didn't include child Aaliyah in his version is because he realized that Paul confronting and killing the Baron on his own is way more satisfying than Aaliyah doing it. It fits Paul's vengeance arc and feels more cathartic given the history between these two characters. Because in this version, Aaliyah just kind of shows up and kills the Baron, which is accurate to the book, but not very satisfying from a cinematic perspective. Then we get Paul finally confronting the Emperor and feyd-rautha, which continues the hilarity. Comparing this movie to Dune Part 2 is a bit mean and unfair, but it is funny to compare these two scenes in particular. One effectively conveys the emotional weight and anger behind Paul's words.
Consider what you're about to do, Paul Atreides.
Silence!
And the other is just awkward and funny.
You mustn't speak!
We then get the fight between Paul and Feyd, just like in the book. But since Feyd wasn't established to be a great fighter like in the book, this battle doesn't really have any tension. And since Feyd was never made into a distinct character from the other Harkonnens apart from that one scene I won't mention again, Feyd has no real emotional investment. It makes the whole thing kind of anticlimactic. Paul just stabs Feyd through the mouth and Aaliyah screams,
"Oh, he is the Kwisatz Haderach!"
And then it begins to rain on Arrakis for some reason, and the movie ends very abruptly. We then immediately cut to credits showing these still images of the characters while an 80s synth ballad plays in the background. This feels like the ending to an 80s sitcom, not a science fiction epic, but I guess it's appropriate that the film ends just as it began. Very awkwardly. After sitting through David Lynch's Dune, I have to say it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, but it still isn't good. It is a movie that I have a lot of respect for because of its great cinematography, music, production, and ambition. There are moments in this movie where you can see Lynch's style and passion for the book shine on screen. And I can say that I did have a good time watching this movie as this weird time capsule from the 80s. However, I still can't call this a good movie for all the reasons I just described. The exposition is overbearing, the world building is bizarre, the characters are underwritten, and the ultimate message of the story is completely missed. It's an ambitious failure, but a failure nonetheless, both as an adaptation of the novel and as an action sci-fi blockbuster. So, with all of that, I'm giving David Lynch's Dune from 1984 2.5 out of 5 stars. Truly an ambitious mess for the ages that is still entertaining to watch as the bizarre time capsule it is. I hope you all have enjoyed this video. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content, and let me know what other sci-fi movies you'd be interested in me reviewing on this channel. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
I think is, as I said, going into a new world, going into the unknown. But you should be not afraid of using your intuition and think your way through. Have the experience and trust your inner knowing of what it is.